Jeremy Suttles wasn't prepared for the sheer number of people at the Juntan spaceport. It was supposed to be backwater, out of the way, a good place to get his feet wet, according to his instructor back on Earth. Terra. Whatever. The moment he stepped out of his shuttle, there were literally hundreds of Xenos showing him ways to make millions of credits, or the very best weaponry the galaxy had to offer for mere hundreds. His hand subconsciously stuck his cred chip into his shirt pocket, and his hand stayed there.
When you get on station, just remember not to jump into the first freighter you see. Look around a bit. Take a peek inside if you can. Just know what you're getting yourself into. They're all death traps. Just some are faster about it than others.
Jeremy remembered his instructor saying as they prepared to take their final exams on general Xeno ship maintenance. Humans were in huge demand. He had learned early on. His ma and pa weren't doing too well with the farm back on Earth, especially since they discovered that Earth could just import food for almost what it cost to farm it locally. He had always planned to help them at least as much as they helped him through his troubled childhood. It was either a fight, a girl, and sometimes both, but he kept his nose clean. The drug tests Xenos had went back decades, and they were pretty strict about humans, being new to the Federation and all, not to mention their physical prowess. They especially didn't want a human, Terran, whatever, hopped up on drugs trapped on a ship with beings half their size and a tenth of their strength. Booze was okay, though, strangely enough, something about tradition he had heard. After about 30 minutes, Jeremy felt he had enough. According to his comm, there was a bar that catered to humans just 100 meters away. It took him 20 more minutes to push his way through the crowd, but he managed to make it there with his cred chip intact.
Bourbon,
he asked as he sat at the bar. Several conversations halted and twice as many eyes suddenly fell upon him as the bartender donned thick gloves and poured the toxic, to them, liquid into a glass for him. Jeremy swallowed it and asked for another before his server took his gloves off, mostly to keep him from having to put them back on for at least a few minutes.
Anything else?
The barkeep asked.
Just a glass of water, please. That'll be all.
Jeremy said, pushing his cred chip toward him. He sipped the last shot, not in any kind of hurry. There were thousands of ships on the dock. Even if only 10% were looking for a new maintenance guy, 100% would jump at getting their hands on a human.
I'll have a bourbon as well,
a very alien voice said next to him. Jeremy and the bartender both looked at the newcomer in astonishment.
Can you even...
he began to ask.
No, it's for you, Terran. I'd like to have a word with you.
Jeremy recognized the Xeno as a Pa'arthan. They were an avian mammal hybrid species that sort of looked like flesh-winged demons from really old books. From the horns turning inward, he ascertained that it was a female, but the way this particular Pa'arthan carried herself was extremely dominant, uncharacteristic of their species, if he remembered right. They settled into a booth, and the Pa'arthan pressed a button that erected a privacy screen. People on the outside could see that there were people inside, but it'd be difficult without an advanced decryption device to even ascertain what was inside.
You're looking for work,
she said, more than asked.
Honest work,
he said, downing the second bourbon.
No doubt,
she said. After a moment, he realized she was waiting for him to speak. He also remembered that to consider a Pa'arthan socially cunning was akin to saying poop smelled not so good. They were one of the few purely predator species allowed into the Federation. Even Terrans weren't considered a purely predator species. Their predatory tactics stretched far beyond simply finding and hunting food, however. They were expert manipulators.
You have 10 seconds, and I'm walking out of here,
Jeremy said. She took 8 of those precious seconds to either think, or make Jeremy think she was thinking.
I'm willing to pay you double for double the risk.
Not interested,
Jeremy said, standing. She suddenly reached out a taloned hand, but it faced upward, a sign of submission.
Please, listen to me.
Aside from the wings and the clawed hands, Pa'arthans looked a lot like humans, Jeremy realized. Her expression was one of desperation, and much to his detriment, had never really been able to turn away someone in need.
I'll hear you out,
He said.
but that's it.
Thank you.
She said, slowly retrieving her hand.
I am Selah of the House Tear. You may have heard of our house.
Jeremy shook his head.
I'm brand new. Fresh off the boat, you might say.
It took a moment, but Selah seemed to get the joke. But it registered as a slight upward tick of her eyes rather than a full-hearted laugh.
I need a Terran. Our kind cannot keep up with the schedule I will be demanding of them soon. Even I will not be able to keep up with this schedule. I need your stamina and your skills. You wear the ring of the college, yes? You are most certainly qualified to work on a bird, ship as mine. You may have even trained on one.
Jeremy twisted the ring on his finger, thankful that it hadn't somehow gotten lifted from his finger through the crowd. It was true. The college taught him quite a bit about Xeno shipbuilding, planning, and maintenance. Several of the ships he trained on were Pa'arthan, in fact, since they were one of the first to welcome them fully into the Federation.
Please excuse my skepticism, Selah, but my father always taught me that there's no such thing as easy money.
Selah sat back, visibly offended, if only slightly.
The pay equals the risk. I will not lie to you, there will be danger.
What danger? I could walk out of here right now and earn my entire family a generous retirement in a matter of 10 years. I'm sure there's danger. There's always danger. Hell, there's more danger driving a car on my home planet than working out here, even with double your risk. I need you to be perfectly clear with me right here, right now, or I'm leaving.
I cannot not hear.
She said.
This is not something for ears, but for your eyes. You need to see what you are going to be tasked with.
Everything inside Jeremy screamed at him to stop, but the curious side of him silenced those things. He nodded, and they slowly exited the bar. The ship in front of Jeremy was more of a junk heap than a space-worthy freighter. Recalling an old movie, it made him think of the Millennium Falcon looking like a cruise ship compared to what he was staring at.
Oh,
Was all he could utter.
It flies better than it looks, trust me.
Selah said, leading him up the ramp.
I bet it can do the Kessel run in 12 parsecs, too.
He muttered. Selah paused, then turned.
Not quite, even taking into account that a parsec is only a unit of distance, and not distance over time. I watched Star Wars when it debuted 190 years ago, and given the other pieces of the formula to evaluate time and distance, the behemoth would be considerably slower, about 30% by my math.
Jeremy's jaw didn't shut until he was inside, which was thankfully better maintained than the exterior.
You're here to see our problem, my problem, and hopefully your problem if you accept it. Follow me.
He noticed a complete lack of crew. Most ships this size would at least crew 10 or so, not compensating for the lack of rest Terrans required. They came to a bulkhead, strange among the established species, since they didn't tend to favor redundant safety measures as much as humans did. This one seemed out of place, though, like it was ad hoc, and not quite at the core, but pretty close to it. Selah stopped and turned to him.
Here's where I tell you as much as I can. Once we cross this threshold, there's not much turning back. You have to decide here and now if you'll come aboard as one of my crew. If not, there will be someone else maybe, but if so, you won't be permitted to leave or communicate outside of this ship.
Jeremy nodded.
So tell me,
Selah took a breath, leaning against the corridor.
Terrans are well known for one thing, their stamina. You keep going when every other species would have passed out from exhaustion. Not only that, but you maintain intellectual acuity far beyond what we or any other species we know of could. Your college teaches you how to be the best maintenance engineers the galaxy has to offer.
and
And all of our cargo isn't entirely condoned. It's nothing illegal, mind you, just not legal, if you know what I mean.
I'm afraid I don't.
Jeremy said. He shouldered his duffel bag and turned to leave.
It's medicine!
Selah called out to him as he reached the ramp. He stopped.
It's medicine for one of our colonies under Terran control. Look, I'll show you. No bond, just don't tell anyone.
Jeremy stood in front of several open storage containers that would stock a normal hospital for a decade. Mostly antibiotics, but painkillers and mood stabilizers as well. All of them had marks from big pharma companies back home.
Okay, I'm dying to hear the nothing illegal part of this.
Salvaged from a hospital ship, the Mauritania. It was one of your first, went missing just after its first jump.
Jeremy picked up a box, opened it, and looked at the bottle.
This shit expired 20 years ago. How do you expect this to...
We take help where we can get it, Jeremy Subtle. It was sealed and in hard vacuum. We've discarded the containers that were breached. Our people need this right now, and there's just too many jumps to make to distribute this in adequate time. That's why we need a Terran.
That, and having a Terran explain why a Xeno freighter has Terran medical supplies on board makes things easier?
Sella's wings slumped.
Yes.
How long?
He sighed.
6 months, that's all I'm asking. Keep this bird going for 6 months. I'm offering twice the pay at normal time and double pay at overtime. Standard overtime hours, if I remember your terminology correctly.
So anything over 12 a day and anything over 40 hours a week?
Sella took a step back.
No, we do overtime a little different out here. Is that how long Terrans work?
Jeremy shrugged.
Normal shifts are 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week.
We start overtime at 4 hours a day and 20 hours a week. That's standard. Anything else and you're getting ripped off,
She said. Jeremy realized it wasn't double pay, it was quad pay, at least in respect of what he was expecting. He had to be sure.
Wait, so exactly how much are we talking here? Normal rates for an apprentice engineer are 10 credits an hour.
What?
Sella nearly yelled.
You'd be getting robbed. I'll pay you 40 credits an hour, straight time, 80 on overtime.
There was a term for 8 times, octa something, but that's what Jeremy was looking at. He wasn't one to be greedy, but he couldn't turn down this kind of money. He didn't remember the exact exchange rate, but 1,000 Fed credits a month would land you a super posh HAB unit in a neighborhood that the cops only showed up to let you know they were actually there.
What's your OT limit? And you do realize that I'm an apprentice engineer, right?
Yes, I know what an apprentice is, and Terran apprentices are twice as capable as most fleet engineers. Look around you, Jeremy Subtle. This ship needs a Terran. There is no limit. Just promise me you're worth it.
Well, fuck me sideways.
He muttered quietly.
That's not...
Sella replied, obviously hearing him.
It's an expression. I was talking to myself. Sorry.
Jeremy was staring at his pa across the table, waiting for him to say something. Ma had been carrying a cast-iron frying pan full of scrambled eggs, but was presently frozen in time, pending her husband's reaction. Pa, or George Subtle, as most people called him, quietly took a sip of black coffee as he mulled over his son's announcement to the family that he'd be attending the Space Engineer College next month. The frying pan began to slowly weigh down Ma's arms as gravity slowly defeated her. Jeremy's little brother and sister chewed silently.
That's fine,
Pa said suddenly, setting his coffee down. The world seemed to unpause as scrambled eggs were scrapped onto their plates, and Ma said that the biscuits and gravy would be done soon.
I know times are tough right now, Pa, that you need me to help around the farm, but...
Son, let me tell you something.
His stern voice interrupted.
You're 18 years old, and you think you've got it all figured out. Hell, I did when I was 18, and there wasn't a man alive who could have told otherwise. Now you go to this school. Just remember 2 things. I didn't raise no quitter, and we'll always love you.
Thanks, Pa.
Jeremy woke with his alarm and forced his legs to swing out of bed and rest on the cool metal floor. A moment later, he jarred himself back awake and scrubbed his face with his hands to try and get his consciousness out of bed and join the rest of him. He held onto the empty top bunk and slowly stood, knowing that he'd be a little dizzy. He stretched slowly, and the soreness in his muscles reminded him of the work he'd done in the last 2 days. It was the last day of dry dock, and while he would have liked at least a week, Sella insisted that they couldn't wait that long. So he had gotten done everything he absolutely had to at dock, and would EVA for the rest. He slipped his boots on and made his way to the kitchen. When he had first came on board, the ship was a ghost town, but little by little he had met the 7 other crew members. He ground some coffee beans and slowly poured some boiling water through the strainer. He silently wished for a $10 Mr. Coffee, but this is what he currently had. He snagged a piece of breakfast bread and sat at the table. The others were buzzing with conversation, excited to be finally on their way. Jeremy blankly stared off, chewing his bread and pouring coffee into his mouth to try and get his higher brain functions going. The bread had pretty much everything his body would need to get going. Someone at school told him it was like the loaf they served prison inmates back on Earth, but he didn't mind it at all. It sort of reminded him of grits with syrup, but without the texture. The buzz stopped, jarring him out of his daze. He looked around and saw Sela standing in the hatchway. Gone was the pleasant demeanor in which they had met. Her wings were neatly tucked and clasped behind her, and she was dressed for business, not quite a uniform since they all wore whatever. But it looked sharp and gave her an air of authority. She also carried herself like he'd expect a captain to.
Jeremy Tuttle, are we on schedule?
She asked.
Yes, I'll have the secondary fuel intake port done in 2 hours and the ventral cargo door in another 2,
he said, realizing he was quite awake now.
So we'll be able to launch in 5?
Sela asked.
3 if I luck out with the cargo door and the gears are only misaligned.
4 hours, then,
she said, stepping back through the hatchway. He choked down his bread and was pretty sure he gave himself first-degree burns when he slammed his coffee. But he didn't want to disappoint. He was getting up when a fuzzy hand grabbed his arm. Ari was a Marth, which to him looked nearly identical to a stuffed teddy bear. He had mused with the idea of smuggling Ari back home and tossing him into a bin full of toy bears at a department store just to get a kick out of scaring people. Ari was appalled by the idea.
You're pushing yourself too hard,
Ari said.
I'm fine,
Jeremy replied.
No, look.
Ari insisted, pushing his medic tablet in front of him.
Your pain levels have been steadily rising, and your muscles are burned from some kind of acid inside you.
I'm a little sore. I took some ibuprofen earlier. I'll be fine. Besides, today should be a short day.
Ari shook his head.
How are you not bedridden?
Jeremy shrugged, which ironically hurt a little, but assured Ari that he'd be okay, then made his way down to the ventral cargo area. The dry dock was in microgravity, but was thankfully pressurized. The air mixture wasn't ideal for humans, with oxygen being at only 18%, but Jeremy was able to work with just a small supplemental tank and mask, the benefit being that if he was really going at it, he could crank up his oxygen a bit. He got the last screw off the access panel for the door's gearbox and stuck it to the magnet on his vest. Squinting because he was a little afraid of what he'd find, he pulled the panel. He sighed in relief. There was one gear with sheared teeth, but it was mostly an alignment issue.
Hey D, can you bring me the number 4 gear for this door?
He asked over his comm.
It's Dackenburton Totten, and yes.
His earbuds squawked.
Dackenburton, sorry, I'm trying,
he replied. A minute later, an airlock opened and D poked his head up with the gear in his hand. He went to throw it, but Jeremy stopped him.
No, dude, bring it here. We don't need that thing bouncing around the dock if I miss it.
D, another Pa'arthan, spread his wings and gave a gentle flap, propelling him toward Jeremy, who reached his arm out. D caught it, and Jeremy brought him in close.
Thanks,
he said, taking the gear. D stayed watching him work.
Are you really going to have this done soon?
Jeremy slid a spacer onto the axle and got the gear into place.
I'm nearly done. I just need to get the alignment right and we'll be set.
He was turning one of the alignment bolts when an unsettling feeling came over him. He turned and saw D staring at him.
What?
D shook his head.
I'm trying to figure out why Sela wanted a Terran. Sure, you're good at what you do, and you can work a lot longer, but we could have just as well hired a few Pa'arthons.
Jeremy suddenly became aware that D might not know what was in the cargo containers.
Couldn't tell you,
he said. Snorted.
Wait, is this about the war? Seriously?
He asked.
Oh, look, you can think.
That was before I was born, man. I don't have any problem with you,
Jeremy said, turning back to the alignment.
That may be, but I was around for it. So was Sela.
So what?
Jeremy said, turning the last bolt.
Your prejudice against Terrans?
Your powers of observation are simply amazing.
Fuck you, then, Jeremy wanted to say, but held his tongue. It was his third day on the job, and he was still trying to figure out the crew dynamics and where he fit in. Instead, he changed the subject.
How'd you end up on the behemoth anyway?
Dee seemed to relax a little, and the tension eased somewhat.
Sela picked me up on Da'al, Pa'arth's second moon. I was just a deckhand back then.
Are you from one of the big houses like Sela?
Dee snorted a laugh.
No, I was born in the dirt. I was born in the lower canopies, not really the dirt.
I gotcha. Now you're first mate on what has to be the biggest freighter I've ever seen. How long ago was that?
About 80 years ago, just before the war started.
Dee said.
Hand me the panel?
Jeremy asked, reaching out. Dee handed it to him.
I'll let Sela know you're almost finished. Call me when you're ready to test.
Jeremy only had 2 screws in when he heard an electric whine.
Shit!
He yelled, pushing off the hull. Once he was a safe distance, he stabilized with the thrusters on his pack and watched the door open fully, then close.
Hey, Dee, I wasn't ready yet, man. You could have squashed me,
he yelled.
What? I'm nowhere near the door controls.
Dee replied.
Well, someone is. Can you get down there and make sure nobody messes with them?
There was a sigh then.
Sure.
Jeremy got the last screw into place and jetted back to the airlock. The transition from microgravity to gravity felt weird, especially when it was sudden. One boot was on solid ground and the other wanted to float. It made him a little dizzy, but he figured he'd get used to it. Jeremy walked onto the bridge in more or less a rage, but slowed his roll to a sudden stop when he heard Sela arguing with Dee, who pointed right at Jeremy as he stepped into the room.
Whoa, what did I do?
Sela turned to him.
You said that Dakenbert and Tatum actuated the cargo door when you were still outside. He's saying he didn't. Which is it?
It took a moment, then Jeremy realized his mistake.
I made a mistake in assuming Dee was at the controls. I don't know who was actually there.
Now the gravity of that mistake was starting to set in. He had forgotten that most Xenos were quite literal when inferring accusations. In fact, it's what had started the war. By essentially accusing Dee of trying to kill him, then Sela stepping up for him, then his recanting statement just now, he had made her look foolish. Dee should have smirked or outright laughed at both of them, but instead he took a step back and began to excuse himself. Classy, Jeremy thought. Jeremy said,
I realize my mistake, Sela. I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking clearly when I called Dee about the door. Someone did actuate the door, though. I checked the panel, and there's no way it would have opened on its own.
Be careful with your words, Jeremy Subtle,
Dee said in a polite tone, then excused himself. There was silence on the bridge for what seemed like an hour after he left. Jeremy didn't dare move or speak. He found himself breathing as quietly as possible, actually. He had just stepped all over some toes and wasn't sure what was going to happen next.
Are we ready?
Sela asked.
Yes,
Jeremy replied, relaxing a little.
I've gotten everything done that had to be done in dry dock. I'll have to EVA for the rest once we're underway.
You're dismissed, Jeremy Subtle. Take the rest of the day off.
Jeremy escaped the bridge as quickly as he could. He was about to get a sigh of relief when he noticed Dee standing in the middle of the hall.
Shit, he muttered.
Yes, Jeremy Subtle, it appears you did step in some.
Did you just make a joke?
Dee tilted his head.
I think so.
Jeremy allowed himself a soft laugh.
You did the right thing admitting your mistake.
Dee said.
I only wish more Terrans would be willing to suffer humility like that. We may have never had that war.
Yeah, I know,
Jeremy said.
My pa always taught me to own your mistakes, to learn from them.
Pa?
My father.
He seems to be a wise man then.
Dee said. Jeremy nodded. A moment passed and Dee turned to leave, but stopped.
The view from the dorsal canopy is the best if you want to watch the launch.
When Jeremy entered the hydroponics chamber, it was pretty dark, but he could tell that the room was vast, if a little short. The ceiling was only about half a meter over his head. He was feeling around for a light switch when he realized he wasn't alone.
What are you doing in here?
A familiar voice asked.
Dee said I should watch the launch from up here.
There was a soft chirp, and the entire roof parted down the middle and began to slide apart, revealing the outside. He noticed Selah was standing in front of him, looking up as the doors locked into place on the outside of the hull.
Tatum has a sense of humor. Well, when you see him later, pretend I got angry and threatened to expose your insides if you came up here after my duty cycle.
Selah said. If she had been dressed for business before, she was all about relaxing now. Instead of the suit, she was in a large, puffy, and warm-looking robe that looked like it was made out of the most comfortable material imaginable.
Whoa,
Jeremy stammered.
He knows this is where I like to go after I work, and he knows I don't like being disturbed. You're fine. Here, sit.
She pointed to a makeshift bench. Jeremy sat, taking in his surroundings, now that they were illuminated by the station lights. The entire deck was essentially a garden, complete with wide bonsai trees and even a small creek. Selah sat next to him, seeming to quietly decompress. They sat there for a few minutes when a thought occurred to him.
I do have a question, if you don't mind.
Hmm?
How exactly did you see Star Wars when it debuted? That was in the 1970s, I think, and I'm not sure we even had satellites for television back then.
He was watching the massive doors of the dry dock begin to open, revealing the brightly dotted black field behind them, but he swore he heard her smile.
The Federation has been watching Terra for a while. They tend to investigate races with nuclear weapons and spacefaring capabilities. There were thousands of probes, probably still are. Monitoring was contracted out to many people. My house was one of them.
He turned.
Yeah, but you can't really see into a movie theater.
She did, in fact, smile that time.
I think drive-in theaters were before your time then.
A what?
You've never heard of a drive-in?
No, I mean, I get it, but...
Selah laughed.
You'd all get in your cars, you see, and it was basically a parking lot. There were these speakers you put in your car, or you could use your radio to listen to the movie. That's how we got the audio. There was this place where you could get food and drinks in the back, and you could just sit there with someone and comfortably watch a movie together.
He thought for a minute.
Oh, wow. So you'd never have to worry about people talking through the movie. That sounds nice.
Among other reasons, yes.
She said, turning back to watch the launch. Jeremy felt like he was missing something, but then the dry dock doors opened, and an ever-so-slight jolt ran through the behemoth as the docking clamps released them into the night. Jeremy smiled when Ma's face filled his tablet. It was his first mail he'd received since he had left Earth.
Hey, honey, we got your mail. We're all really happy that you found steady work so quickly,
she said. She was at the town's library. Despite the fact that wireless was free and available everywhere on Earth's surface, they had never gotten around to getting a computer, much less tablets or a modem. Still, it was good to hear from her.
Your pa and I had a pretty good laugh when we heard your captain was a movie buff. I know you like those old movies, but I think she might give you a run for your money,
she said. But then her voice lowered to a whisper.
Is she single? I know your pa wouldn't approve, but I think you need to explore the possibilities, you know? Like Captain Kirk.
If Jeremy's eyes could roll any harder, he felt like they'd detach and roll across the floor.
Mom!
He shouted at the recording.
Long as it ain't one of them damn Pathrans, leave that boy alone about that. Here, let me talk to him.
His father shouted. Several patrons shooed him, to which he loudly replied,
My son's an engineer. In space, y'all calm your tits.
Jeremy wanted to bury his face, but he had to admit that it was pretty funny, especially since he didn't have to witness his embarrassment firsthand.
How you doing, boy?
He started.
Your ma and I are pretty proud of you. Always have been. Just wanted you to know that.
He trailed off a bit. Something was on his mind. Pa wiped his face with his hand, which he usually did when he was uncomfortable.
Well, I'm just gonna come out and say it, but we appreciate the money you sent. It helped us out of a bind. Your sister went and fell off Roxy the other day and got dragged damn near a mile before her foot came out of that stirrup. She's okay, though. Broken leg and some sprains, but she'll be all right soon enough.
Jeremy sat up, intent on what else was going on.
And well, there's more bad news. Our tomatoes got ate up by worms. We couldn't afford the spraying, so we just prayed. But sure enough, them worms got to 'em. We really thought we were screwed this time, but Ma went to the bank and there was this $3,000 deposit sitting in there.
Jeremy had almost forgotten about the exchange rate. A smile crept onto his face.
So we were able to get bills paid and Elle fixed up and even got the pumpkin sprayed. So we should be set for a while. Thank you, son.
He leaned back in his bunk with a smirk. That's not a one-off, Pa.
Anyway, so your siblings are off at school, but I'll make sure they get in here to send you a mail soon. We love you, son. You take care now.
Ma leaned in.
Love you, Jeremy.
He sat there for a minute, thinking about what he just witnessed. Ma always told him she loved him. With Pa, well, it was usually implied. He tried to remember the last time, if there was one, when he came right out and said it. He just felt happy that he could help them out.
Jeremy Subtle.
Dee blurped into his calm.
Yes, Dakin Burtontum?
He replied.
Close, but not quite. Scylla wants you up on the bridge.
He said.
I'll be there in 5.
He said. It was Jeremy's day off, but being the only engineer on board, he was pretty much always on call. When he got to the bridge, it felt a little empty.
Sela?
He asked the pilot, another Pa'arthan named Ekorinamina.
Office.
He said without turning away from his console. Office was a strong word when it came to the captain's office. Jeremy thought it was along the same lines of calling the trunk of a car, a cargo area. There wasn't much room except for a desk, a chair, and several monitors, so he kept the door open to save on space.
Come in
She said, not taking her eyes from the screen she was looking at.
and close the door.
Jeremy squeezed inside, having to nearly step to the other side of the desk to get the door shut.
Ma'am?
She smiled.
We're not that formal, Jeremy.
That's the first time you've just used my first name.
He noticed aloud.
I can always go back to calling you Jeremy Subtle if you like.
No, it's not that, but why?
He asked.
Do they not teach you etiquette in college?
Some, but it's pretty general. The Federation has thousands of races in it.
He replied.
For Pa'arthans, we refer to strangers by their full name.
She said, tapping something on the screen, then looking right at him with a smile.
I no longer consider you a stranger.
I see.
He said, feeling that the small room must have a ventilation problem he'd have to add to his ever-growing to-do list.
Anyway, I know it's your day off, but there's something you need to see.
She said, turning a monitor toward him. It was camera footage of the ventral door console, the day he almost got crushed.
Watch.
She said, tapping the screen again. He focused on the screen. Not much of anything besides the panel and the actual door. Suddenly, the indicator switched and the door began to open.
The hell?
Shh, not so loud.
She whispered.
Watch the timestamp.
He watched again.
It jumps.
Yes.
She said dryly.
So we don't know who did it. We just know that it was deliberate. Well,
She glanced at him from the corner of her eye.
Well?
we do have other cameras throughout the ship. I can account for everyone except 3 of the crew.
Oh.
Yes, Dakin Burton Tatum, Reese, the second watch pilot, and
And?
me.
She said somberly.
Well, unless you were going to try and skimp on paying my salary, I doubt it was you.
He said jokingly. A hurt glance reminded him about how literal what he just said was taken.
Sorry, I don't think it was you,
He said.
Just be careful, Jeremy.
She said.
I'll try my best. This is a little outside what I had in mind when we talked about risk, though.
This is unforeseen. The risks I was referring to might result in a few months of incarceration, not getting killed.
She said. Her finger went to her lips, then she slammed her chair backward and shouted,
Get the cargo lift fixed, Jeremy Subtle. You have 2 days.
Geez, okay.
He shouted back, opening the door.
And take your tablet with you.
She yelled, thrusting it toward him. He'd nearly forgotten that he had set it down on her desk. Down the hall, he opened it to find a note. Talk after shift. You know where. He shook his head.
The fuck did I get myself into?
He half muttered, half mumbled. It was definitely his day off, but he needed to clear his head, so he did the one thing he knew would get his mind off everything else, and that was work. He triple-checked his EVA suit for any surprises, grabbed his tools, and went for a walk. He'd take a quick peek at the lift motor while he was out, but since there were several lifts, the bigger problem was getting the beam transmitter back online. Most ports didn't mind open-air communication. In fact, the smaller ones encouraged it so they didn't have to work so hard to maintain traffic control. The big ones, however, like the one orbiting Perth, would cite them even though it was obviously damaged. That was their second stop from now, and only a week away. He jetted forward slowly, careful not to overshoot and miss, or worse, not miss. He passed the lift motor's paneling on his way. It'd be a bit of a detour, so he figured he'd come back after dinner. As he got close to the transmitter, he flipped on his headlamp and turned on his mag boots.
Oh man,
He said as his lights hit the transmitter.
What's wrong?
Echorenamia asked.
what hit this thing? It's nearly shredded.
Oh, that. Well, there was that unmarked debris field we ran into a while back.
Right.
He said, remembering a prior conversation with Sella that explained most of their problems. Debris was dangerous, especially unmarked debris, and very especially unmarked debris traveling nearly a kpas relative. Jeremy turned and grabbed the tote that silently followed him and set it down, its magnetic lock engaging on its own. Opening it, he got the spool of optic cable ready.
The only expensive wire is a short wire. Her,
He said, mocking his former instructor. He was little embarrassed, realizing he was still on comm, and decided to keep his jokes to himself. He unscrewed what was left of the panel and was tempted to let it float away, but he'd just be adding to the debris problem. He tugged on the existing cable and it came without a hitch. Then he scaled the mast, disconnected it from that end as well, then made his way back to the base. He fed the sheared optic cable through the support mast, and realized halfway he needed to run a new power cable as well. He sighed, a little frustrated, and pulled the cable back out, taped the end of a power cable to it, and continued feeding it up the 10-meter mast. After he felt like he put about 10 meters worth of cable through the mast, he scaled it and found the end right where he expected it to be. The dish had a few dings in it, but it'd still work, maybe. The transmitter itself looked undamaged, which was good since he didn't have a spare. Reminding himself to tether, he pulled his line out and attached it to the mast. He wasn't far from the ship, and his EVA suit had plenty of fuel, but he'd rather not risk it. If something went wrong, and he couldn't jet back, he'd be floating off into the night for a long time. After making his connections, he put everything back together and started making his way back. About halfway, something caught his periphery, but by the time he was able to rotate his whole suit to look, there was nothing but the ship and the stars.
The black'll play tricks on you.
He muttered quietly enough to not send it over comms again. Once back at the base, he made his connections there and gave Echorenamia a call.
Everything looks good on my end, but we won't know for sure until we see another ship or port.
He reported.
Awesome, I'll be back in time for dinner,
Jeremy said happily. He got his materials and tools secured, carefully checking that he didn't leave anything behind. There were few worse feelings than realizing that the wire strippers you really need, like right now, were left on the outside of a 2-kilometer-long freighter in space. Doing some mental math, he figured he'd have just enough time to grab a quick bite before meeting Sella. Jeremy promised himself that he'd be more attentive in case she decided to ever drop another hint at him. He'd beaten himself up over the last one for nearly a week. To make matters worse, Dee had been poking fun at Jeremy for what he thought was a good tongue lashing, but in all likelihood could have been a tongue lashing of a different and more enjoyable variety. Or maybe he was reading too much into things? He grinned. He was deep in thought, and barely paying attention when something jarred him from behind. When Jeremy turned, the tote was exactly where it was supposed to be, but there simply wasn't anything out there. Maybe it wasn't paying attention either. A minute later, it happened again. This time, he caught the tote backing away from him. He punched it playfully. He laughed and said,
Hey, watch where the hell you're going.
Who?
He called.
Oh, nothing. My tote keeps bumping into me.
He said. Continuing forward, he discovered that concentrating was becoming more difficult. Something wasn't right, so he checked the suit's readouts on his wrist. What he saw made his throat tighten. He was leaking oxygen and fast. He had air, but the O2 tank or hose had a leak. There was supposed to be an audio alert, but he had gotten none. With a profound amount of disregard, he opened up the throttle on his jetpack.
Hey, E?
Yes?
I'm losing O2, buddy. I'm hauling back to the airlock. See if you can get someone to work the door for me.
Which one?
He sounded a little frantic.
It's
His mind went blank. Which airlock had he come out of? Which one was closest?
14, I think.
On it. How much do you have left?
He asked. Jeremy could hear some yelling in the background, probably Sela. Jeremy's peripheral vision started to darken, and focusing was getting really, really difficult.
Probably not enough.
He said solemnly.
Hurry! We'll have the door open for you.
He glanced at his reading, but it was a blur now, a very, very short red blur instead of a long row of green, glowing bars. He really needed to concentrate on his speed, but it was all he could do to just stay awake. The airlock came into view, and the outer door was wide open, and he swore he could see D through the porthole. It didn't matter. Even if D was trying to kill him, everyone knew he was coming into airlock 14. Was he going too fast? He wasn't sure. All he knew was that he was out of time. The airlock was getting really big, really fast. Yep, time to reverse thrust. Jeremy found that his hands were numb and realized that he was about to become very intimate with the inner airlock door very soon. The big numbers above the door came into focus momentarily. 13, they read. His vision dimmed to black, then he heard a bang and a clatter, then finally, nothing. Jeremy blinked several times as he suddenly awoke. There was no pain, no grogginess, and he felt like he could think clearly. He was in a hospital room, but not aboard the Behemoth, and certainly not on Earth. A moment later, the door to his room opened, but Jeremy couldn't see anyone. It was as though a ghost opened the door, walked in, and shut it behind them. Now it was pulling a chair closer to his bed. Ari jumped up to be eye level with Jeremy, who started.
Geez, man, you scared me.
Ari looked at him quizzically.
How?
Sitting up, Jeremy said.
I couldn't see you walk in. The door just opened and closed. That, and you kind of don't make any noise when you move around.
Oh, sorry.
Jeremy grinned, then shook his head.
Last thing I remember was running out of oxygen and trying my best impersonation of a pancake on the airlock.
Ari's expression grew a little dark.
Well, you somewhat succeeded on both accounts. Definitely the first one, but I wouldn't have quite given you pancake status.
Why don't I hurt, like at all?
Jeremy asked.
Well, Duck and Bert and Tatum got you onto a gurney, and we put you in stasis until we docked at Meege, which is where we are now. They've got decent facilities here, but we had to shuttle in a neurologist to get your gray matter right.
Ari said, his eyes drifting off.
What's the bad news?
Jeremy asked, preparing himself.
Well, you cost House Tyr quite a bit putting you back together, and Sela went the extra mile and got you a few upgrades. Other than that, we did cognition tests while you were out, and you looked in pretty good shape, considering.
Wait. D put me in a gurney?
Yeah. He saw you leave airlock 13, but didn't have time to tell anyone before you decided to try to breach it with your face. He was the first one there.
Was he in an EVA suit?
Jeremy asked.
No. Why would he have been? He was in the kitchen with Ressi. They were helping Kier get dinner ready.
He said. That's 2 out of 3 suspects accounted for.
What's wrong?
Ari asked. Jeremy shook his head. There was simply no way the cargo door actuated itself and something had hit him while he was EVA.
Nothing,
he said.
Just trying to piece things together.
Ari nodded.
So tell me about these upgrades,
he asked, changing the subject.
Thought you'd never ask.
He yelped, jumping onto Jeremy's bed. He tilted his tablet so they could both see.
All right. First up, coiled polymer muscle fibers. We've added a few to your major muscle groups. They'll make you quite a bit stronger, but they're tied into your existing nervous system in a way that they'll only activate when you're dealing with some serious loads.
Jeremy felt his arms, but they didn't feel any different.
We haven't turned any of this stuff on yet, silly. Have to let you know how it all works first. Anyway, next up was a brain augmentation. Basically, a monitoring station for all these new toys and some upgrades to your vision, hearing, and smell. Well, plus some other things. Upgrading tactile sensation is pretty expensive, and Sella didn't want to break the bank, so we skipped on that one except for your fingertips. It's basically so you can feel screws and other tiny things through EVA gloves and such.
My EVA already had reciprocating pressure sensors in them,
He stated.
Yes, but these are so much better. You can still use those, but these will let you touch something through the suit, like you're not even wearing it.
Ari said, getting excited.
Okay, you're leading up to something. What is it?
Ari was standing on his bed, literally hopping from foot to foot.
Are you ready for this?
I hope so.
He said, trying to match Ari's excitement.
We tapped some of the things that make you Terrans really good, and made them better. You're basically a super Terran.
Wait, what?
Imagine not needing nor wanting sleep, not losing focus because you drank too much the night before, not hurting so bad after working a long day.
He practically squealed.
Sounds neat?
He said, confused. Ari stopped dancing.
I thought you'd be really happy.
No, it's great, Ari. I just didn't know what to expect. How does all that work?
He asked.
Okay, so get this.
He said, picking up where he left off.
Your brain aug will take care of most of that and more over the next few months. It's a slow transition since a fast one might shock your subconscious into thinking something was wrong. Some things will kick in right away, like the acid buildup I noticed a while back.
You know that's there for a reason, right?
Jeremy stated more than asked.
I do. Your people called it the Krebs cycle. It's to keep you from overexerting or hurting your muscles until they've recovered. But the thing is, your coiled polymers will pick up the slack. So other things, like improving your waking recovery, will take more time. Eventually, only 2 to 3 hours per your normal rhythm.
That's awesome, Ari.
Jeremy lied through his teeth. He wasn't quite sure how to feel about these upgrades yet. The muscles, sure. The improved senses? Awesome. Being Super Terran didn't sound like its namesake at all.
Okay, now that you're up, we can get going. We brought some of your clothes for you. Sorry I had to go through your things,
He said.
No problem at all. Thank you, Ari.
He said, smiling.
I'll let Sella know you're up and getting ready. We need to get a move on if we're going to keep schedule.
Hey, Ari.
Jeremy called out to him as he opened the door.
Exactly how long was I out for?
Ari looked at his tablet.
About 16 hours. We've already made our drop here, so we didn't lose a ton of time, but we've got to get going.
Jeremy sat there for a few minutes, collecting his thoughts. He should definitely be dead. His mind's eye went back and looked for anything he might have missed at the time, but the only thing he knew for certain was that Dee was inside the airlock and not outside with him. If what Ari said was accurate, that left Sella herself. But why go through all the trouble of killing him, only to pour more money into getting him fixed up? Jeremy stood and grabbed his pants. As he did so, he realized that Ari had turned on his upgrades. He could easily feel the contours of the woven fabric, occasionally finding a frayed thread here and there. It was interesting, to say the least. He brushed his arm, and instead of feeling somewhat fuzzy arm hair, he noticed each individual follicle. He even counted them if he wanted. He was holding his pants in one hand, and that arm in the other hand when Sella walked in. She said, not quite averting her gaze.
Ari said you were ready.
Jeremy suddenly realized the awkward position he was in, but surprisingly wasn't that embarrassed.
I was about to, but realized he turned on my tactile something or another's, and it's, well, interesting.
Should I come back, maybe?
She asked.
No, it's fine.
He said, and essentially jumped into his pants. Once they were on, the tension eased slightly.
Well, I appreciate the patching up. I'll have to get back to you on the rest, he said.
You're welcome, Jeremy.
She said, smiling.
Thank you for all you've done. We'd still be in dry dock without your help.
She replied.
Yeah, on that note, what other upgrades did the brain aug come with? I'm thinking differently,
Oh?
She said, stepping closer.
How so?
faster. I'm putting pieces of this puzzle together a lot quicker than I think I would have otherwise.
Anything else?
She asked, taking a seat on the corner of the bed. Jeremy noticed that she was in casual dress, letting her wings float closely to her, rather than clasped together. Any other time, he'd pursue the hinted invitation until he got kicked out or they locked the door. But something was eating away at him.
You weren't trying to kill me. You made sure I got hurt so you could get these upgrades in,
he stated. His feet planted into the floor, facing Sella, his shoulders broadened. She crossed her arms, not saying anything at first. He had crossed a line, knowingly and intentionally crossed a line.
You're the better for it, are you not?
She asked.
You could have asked Sella,
he said plainly. That was it. There was no drama, just facts. He didn't care about the why, just that she had done it.
I couldn't afford the possibility of you declining,
she said. Jeremy pulled his shirt on, then sat to get his boots laced.
That being said, this might be your port of call, but it's my last stop on the behemoth.
Those are my implants in you, Jeremy Subtle,
she reminded him.
Yeah!
He yelled.
Implants necessary because you nearly killed me. I'd say we're about even. Why the hell didn't you ask?
I need you. There's more going on than you know.
I'm out. Call Dakenburton Tatinum. Have him get my things and have them on the station by the time I get there,
he demanded. Jeremy went to leave, but she suddenly stood and blocked his way. He gently took her by the arms, but she grabbed his face and brought it to hers, kissing him. It was nice, and reminded him of a cheerleader from another school he'd made out with under the bleachers. He'd gotten into a fight with her boyfriend shortly after and lost, but that kiss had been worth it. He pulled back, then gently moved her.
There was a time when I'd have loved to see where this went, Sella.
What happened?
Dee asked, holding a small box of things. The tote hauled his duffel bag full of tools and clothes. The box was little trinkets and things he'd kept.
Dakenburton Tatinum, I really don't want to talk about it,
Jeremy said, reaching for his things. Dee twisted, moving the box just out of reach.
Jeremy, did you just get my name right?
He thought for a second.
Dakenburton, yeah, I got it right. Please, my things?
Dee sat the box down and took Jeremy by the arm.
We need to talk for a minute, Jeremy. Come. I know there's a bar right up here that has whiskey.
Again, there was a privacy screen. Again, there was booze. It was a very familiar scene, and to Jeremy, it was starting to getting old.
Sela means well, Jeremy,
Dee said, taking a swig of something Pa Arthans considered an equivalent to whiskey.
She sure has a fucking strange way of showing it.
You're angry,
Dee stated.
and you called me the observant one? I'm also not your enemy.
Jeremy sighed, took a shot, ordered 2 more, took one of the new ones, and let himself relax a little.
You're right. Thanks, by the way,
he said.
For getting your things, it was...
No, dummy, for dragging my splattered body out of the airlock. But yes, thank you for getting my things, too.
Dee put a clawed hand on his shoulder.
You're okay, Jeremy Subtle. I'm not going to evade the fact that I hated you when I first met you, but Sela was right about you.
Right about what?
You're an honest Terran. To be an honest person, you have to be honest with yourself. Right now, you're trying to figure out exactly what it is you want, why you feel the way you do, how you should feel. I can see the conflict going on inside your head,
He said.
I'm honest enough, you mean? Honest enough not to bullshit you, but just enough dishonest that I'd lie to a Terran police cruiser for you?
He asked. Dee's head tilted in thought.
Pretty much, yes. We needed someone who would be honest with those who depended on him, who really didn't care much for Terran government.
Look, I know you guys are savvy when it comes to socialization, but how could Sela pick me out of a packed spaceport and know that I'm honest? What good does that do you anyway? It's not like I'm in charge of anything important.
Instead of speaking, Dee clasped his claws together. Whatever he was drinking was slowing his wit, Jeremy saw. He downed his next shot, then ordered 2 more. One way or another, he was getting drunk today.
You're wrong on both accounts, Jeremy.
Dee said.
First, what you do is extremely important, and we need someone who is both competent and honest with the rest of the crew. There's a lot of Terrans who may have more skill than you, but very few may possess the level of moral sense you have. That might have been a better term to use, moral sense. There's a plethora of Terran engineers we could have hired from, but you know what? They'd get half the work done, claim the same hours, and tell us the other half would be fine. Then our ship suddenly finds itself in a debris field and we're getting shredded to bits.
Oh, Jeremy said, setting the drink down he was about to knock back.
Have you ever wondered why we have bunk beds? 2 sleeping places to a room? Only half of them are used?
Dee asked.
Your last engineer was a Terran of the shittier variety, I take it?
Dee nodded, finished his drink in 2 gulps, and ordered another.
There's more to it, though.
Sela didn't pick me out of a crowd, did she?
He asked.
Nope,
Dee said as his drink arrived.
I'm not getting why she tried to kill me, though,
Jeremy said, slamming his empty shot glass onto the table.
Insurance.
Dee said.
What?
Cheaper that way. Only way it was possible, actually. Insurance covered everything except your fine tactile sensation. She spent the last bit of our savings on that.
What? I thought House Terror paid for all that,
Jeremy shouted. Whatever Dee was drinking came out of his nose. Between coughing and laughing, he held his hand up.
Ter didn't pay for any of it. Who told you that? Erie's a good guy, an even better medic, but he doesn't know anything.
Dee got the last bit of liquid out and laughed in earnest.
Why wouldn't House Terror help Sela out?
He asked. Dee settled down, took a gulp of what was left of his drink, and said very plainly,
Sela's disowned, Jeremy. She's house nothing right now. Among us, she's a slight step up from where I came from, but as far as her family sees it, she's living in the dirt.
What am I missing? You know about the cargo?
Jeremy asked.
Yes.
What gives?
Well, the war started because politicians can be pretty stubborn, to the point of spilling blood rather than admitting a mistake. There's blame to go around for sure, but you guys did start it,
he said thoughtfully.
I'm not arguing that. Our politicians haven't really done anything for anyone besides themselves in a long time.
This, Jeremy Subtle,
Dee said, shoving a wavering claw at him.
This is why you are here. Look, I'm not supposed to say anything, but Sela thought you'd work out, you know? Help us out.
Jeremy realized that the whiskey was starting to work on him, too.
What do you mean?
Our people, Jeremy. After the war, Terra holds 8 of our colonies. They keep them there by forcing them to depend on them, you know? For medicine, work, protection, things like that. That's what this mission is all about. We're not trading hardly anything. Sela wants to put us to work helping out those people, you know? All the profit we do make goes to the mission.
Another whiskey went down the hatch. He almost ordered more, but realized the last 3 probably hadn't hit him yet.
Okay,
he shouted, then quietly realized,
I get it.
Good! A muffled voice came from the crook of Dee's arm. Their privacy screen would expire soon, and if the barkeep saw him passed out, they'd get thrown out.
Wake up, bud,
he said, gently shaking Dee.
Come on.
What? Oh, we're still here,
he said.
Your powers of observation are astounding,
Jeremy shouted. They both laughed long and hard at that.
Okay,
Jeremy said, noticing that the privacy screen was gone.
How do I make things right with Sela?
I don't know, Jeremy. Talk to her? You're a pretty good talker, you know? Not like us, but pretty good.
She's got a lot to answer for herself, you know.
Yeah, she knows. She's pretty smart, too.
Dee slurred. It was time to go. With the info he got from Ares' tablet, he pulled up the specs on his brain augment. It was pretty well known that augments that altered even mood were illegal, except in special cases, and the ability to actually control thoughts, much less actions, through neuromechanical means was still science fiction. Yet it still bothered him. Though, all in all, the TX-4801 augment looked benign, no mind control here. It was a decent model, but didn't even have the ability to administer drugs. It was purely there to do only slightly more than what Airy told him it could do. The 4801 had a math coprocessor built in. Jeremy stared off into space and recited pi. He stopped after he got to 30 digits. He didn't know formulae for plotting orbital burns and such, so it couldn't help him there, but he was able to do even complex area and volume calculations in his head. Any formula he knew, it could compute. He also noticed an overlay of sorts whenever he saw alien writing, translating not just words, but the idea behind what was written. One notable example was the sign over the airlock door. It'd take a paragraph to translate it to English. Instead, an animated overlay showing that only one door could open at a time, to include safety lockouts and overrides, illustrated the point of the lettering. Setting the tablet down, he got up. It was time to get some answers. Part of him wanted to leave, to grab his stuff and hop off the freighter. He wouldn't have any trouble finding work. Meej was a little small as stations went, but he'd noticed plenty of ships coming and going as he half-carried, half-stumbled Dee back to the ship earlier. He made his way through the ship, which he found to be pretty quiet except for the occasional fan or pump turning on. He passed through the kitchen and didn't even see Kier as he continued. The other part of him wanted to believe Dee, and by extension, Sela. Their official story wasn't even that far-fetched. He felt a little responsible. Even though his generation didn't fight in the war, his generation was still occupying several of their worlds. And for what? The bridge was empty, as was the captain's office. This was really strange. Jeremy went to a console and brought up the crew locator. Everyone except him was in the ventral cargo area. He turned to leave, but something on the console caught his eye. There were others there as well, 4 of them. Bringing up the video feed, all he got was a brief moment of static, then the no signal message. He cycled through other feeds that might show him what was going on, but all he could get was a passageway that looked through a porthole into the hold. He couldn't make anything out. As Jeremy grew closer, he could hear voices. One, definitely Dee, was explaining that everything they had on board matched the manifest. A strange voice spoke in English.
Oh, I'm sure it is. We just need to verify everything.
That could take weeks.
Dee shouted.
We have perishables. They'll be rotten by the time we get them to their destination.
As soon as the voice spoke again, he knew it was Terran, probably from the Midwestern U.S.
And like I said, there's the expedite fee of 50,000 credits, and we'll be on our way.
Jeremy pushed the hatch open and walked onto the deck.
So what did I miss?
The 4 Terrans, dressed in police uniforms, turned with their rifles raised. Jeremy showed that his hands were empty.
You from Ohio, Michigan, maybe?
What's it to you?
Nothing. Just thought I recognized the accent is all. Look, these guys don't have 50 thou just lying around. Besides, that's not even their cargo, it's mine. And I'm just a contractor who subbed them to move it.
He lied. It was a gamble. He had no idea what they had talked about prior. As he drew closer, Jeremy smelled spent powder and noticed a single shell casing on the floor. He didn't notice any blood, though, which was a good sign.
So this is your cargo?
Asked the officer.
Sure is,
Jeremy said, taking another step closer.
Well, then maybe you have the 50 that...
He stopped, listening to something over his earpiece. Jeremy took another step so he could hear.
Now, if he's with one of those big companies like Northrop or Google, you best leave him alone. We've got enough to worry about.
Understood,
the officer said, then back to Jeremy.
Who are you delivering for? Maybe your employer would pony up the fee so you can make your next port?
If he didn't play it easy, they might think he was listening in. Brain augs weren't that uncommon after all. He decided to sell the story a little.
Can't say.
Who?
Can't say, confidentiality and all that.
The officer pointed his rifle at the ceiling, fired, then aimed it back at Jeremy.
I'm not going to ask again.
Whoa, man, easy. Fine, it's Lockheed.
Prove it.
Jeremy shrugged.
Private contractor, remember?
The officer's face slowly contorted with disgust.
Fuck!
I'm sorry?
Jeremy shrugged.
Can't help who we work for sometimes.
Let's go,
he said to the other officers. As they left, when they thought they were out of earshot, one of the others complained,
Sarge, you said this was a sure thing.
There was a small scuffle, words too low for Jeremy to hear. Then they resumed their defeated march off the ship.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Sella said, starting toward him.
Thank you, Jeremy? Are you serious? You nearly killed me, and for what? Some stupid implants?
He shouted. It wasn't a Payarthan thing, just common sense thing. You didn't chew out your captain in front of their crew. It just wasn't done. It only led to bad things and put the captain in a position to either deal with you or lose the trust the crew had in her. However, Jeremy was tired of the secret bullshit going on. Airing it out might make everyone a bit more honest.
Those implants just saved this mission,
she said.
Did they not?
Erie said.
What mission?
They didn't know?
I, for one, would like to know exactly what's going on here. Whose mission is this? Yours? Your house's?
Sella breathed deeply.
We're delivering medicine and arms to Pa'arthan colonies under Terran control,
she said plainly.
Arms?
Jeremy asked, not sure if he had heard her correctly.
Nothing big, not enough for a revolt, but enough to defend themselves if we can get the Terrans to leave peacefully.
Sorry, but what?
Jeremy shouted.
I'm supposed to believe that.
Sella took a half-step backward.
You cut my oxygen, nearly killed me, forced me into a position I couldn't say no to, no more than 12 hours ago. And now you're telling me that we're supplying arms to Pa'arthan colonies to defend themselves.
Aerie stood up straight.
Sayla, you cut his oxygen? What the shit?
Jeremy took the briefest of moments to process the fact that the one of the most adorable creatures he'd ever laid eyes on, one that he first mistook for a teddy bear, just swore. Turning his attention back to Sela, Jeremy saw that she didn't have a prepared or easy explanation. He might have felt bad for her, except the whole trying to kill him thing. Dee stepped forward.
Jeremy, we talked about this, why we're doing this. The only thing we've not told you is that nearly half of the Pa'arthans under Terran occupation belong to House Ter.
That's enough, Dockenbert Tatum,
she said. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place. It was like finding that one piece you needed to make sense of everything stuck to the bottom of the box. He suppressed the urge to out her right then and there. She might be hundreds of years his senior, but right now he saw her as just a kid. Disowned as she was, trying her best to do right by her family. He could certainly empathize with that. He even knew a guy that was pretty hard to please. Her methods were borderline cruel, but he had to admit that they were effective. After all, they led him right to where he was standing at that particular moment.
For what it's worth, I'm sorry,
she said. Nothing was said for what seemed like forever, so the crew began to disperse. Sayla and the other Pa'arthans left first, but then Aerie and the others came to him.
Jeremy, I don't know what you plan on doing, but what happened to you was wrong. We're all hired crew here, not like the Pa'arthans who work for her out of some sense of twisted loyalty. You were the one wronged here, so if you decide leave, we'll go with you. We'll find a new ship to work with,
he said. The others nodded in agreement, then shuffled out. Jeremy was left alone in the cargo hold. If they all left, there'd just be Sella and the other three. The behemoth was pretty autonomous, but they were already running a skeleton crew. If he left, everything they'd been working for would fall apart. He opened one of the special containers, noting that the outside dimensions were those of a standard shipping container. Once inside, however, he found that the walls didn't quite match up.
Dockenbert Tatum, can you bring me my tool belt?
He asked.
Sure.
Minutes later, Jeremy was unbolting the false walls of the container. He had Dee help him unload it first, but now he was sitting on a crate of expired meds, watching him work. The last bolt came off, and Jeremy let the inner wall fall over, revealing a modest arsenal. It was nothing crazy, just some rifles and a single anti-air rocket.
So what's the plan here, Dockenbert Tatum? Arm the rebels? Fight off the evil oppressors?
We're hoping it doesn't come to that, Jeremy. We're timing our deliveries to match a motion in the Council for the Terrans to withdraw their forces from our worlds. It'll get brought up that they need to be self-sufficient. That includes being able to defend the colonies.
Sela should be the one explaining herself here, not you,
Jeremy said.
Yet you asked for me.
Dee replied.
Don't know why, but I trust you more, I guess. Might be because you're a guy.
What is that? Oh, never mind.
I can focus on what you're telling me because I'm not distracted. She's out of my league anyway. Not that it matters, really,
Jeremy stated.
Not really. The whole caste system Pa'arthans adhere to doesn't exactly cover Xenos. However, it's somewhat encouraged now because of the doors those kind of relationships open. I just didn't think she'd pick a Terran. No offense.
What do you mean, pick? You think she and I?
Why not?
Dakin Burtentatinum asked.
Oh, you know.
Jeremy said, refastening the bolts of the container's inner wall. A raised brow suggested that Dakin Burtentatinum didn't know.
I've got a thing against chicks that try to kill me.
In all fairness, she wasn't trying to kill you, Jeremy.
He finished tightening the last bolt, shoved the driver into his tool belt, and turned to face Dakin Burtentatim.
Came pretty close. Not something I particularly enjoyed, and, she could have asked.
And risk you saying no?
If I had, you could have gone ahead and put me in that position anyway.
And do you think you'd feel better or worse about the whole situation?
Jeremy thought for a moment.
I see your point, but the thing is, she didn't ask me. It's like taking your car, your pride and joy to a mechanic to bang out some dents and find out they installed a supercharger for you.
Dee's brow furrowed.
I'm not understanding why that's a problem if they did it for free.
It's just,
Jeremy sighed.
You just don't tinker under another guy's hood without asking first.
Dee stood, and they loaded the container with the medicine crates.
Thanks,
Jeremy said.
You need to talk to Sela,
Dee said.
In private.
The garden's ceiling was closed, but Jeremy could see pretty well this time. The pleasant smells of the flora and the sound of the running creek were a little disarming. He found Sela sitting in her usual spot. Without a word, he took the seat next to her.
I never did ask you about this deck,
he said quietly.
A lot of Pa'arthan ships have them. Not quite this big, but they're nice. Reminds me of home,
she said without looking.
I don't think I can look at this situation objectively, Sela. I can't decide on what to do. On one hand, I'm still pretty upset about what you did, but on the other, I think I can see where you're coming from, he said.
I'm sorry, Jeremy. I should have been honest with you to begin with. I should have asked you.
Word travels fast, I see,
he said.
It does, and Dakenbert and team might not completely understand, but I do understand your metaphor.
After a few minutes, the fight inside him died down.
Be honest with me, okay?
He asked, putting his hand on her back.
I don't like what's happening on your colonies either. But if you're honest with me, I might surprise you with how far I'd be willing to go to help.
Why would you help us? You're Terran?
She said, recoiling.
Because those cops? We've got them on Earth too, and they're not just assholes to Xenos. You can get pulled over for basically anything, and so help you if you tell them they can't search your car because they don't have reasonable suspicion? They'll just invent it. The government. It gets more bloated every session, run by a few rich people who swear they know what's good for the rest of us. I guess you can say I was born in the dirt,
he said. She leaned into him, and his arm went to her side. They sat there for a while, listening to the creek in the dark.
You know, Dakenbert and Tatam told me there's a bar on Mige that serves both Drake and whiskey,
Sela said softly.
What else did he tell you?
Jeremy asked.
Drake first,
she said, slowly standing.
Questions later. Besides, it's been a rough day.
Jeremy hesitantly agreed. Something tugged at his mind, telling him that it was a ploy. However, he just had the mother of all bad days, and he wasn't inclined to refuse a drink after one like today. Their schedule allowed for some leeway, and they'd have to spend more on fuel later. And from what he'd learned, money wasn't a luxury they exactly had, but be it from him to deny company-funded booze, though. Jeremy was confused when he woke up. This certainly wasn't his room, but the clothes in the chair next to him were definitely his. The consistent sense of gravity told him that they were still docked. His eyes opened, and if he wasn't mistaken, they were still on the behemoth, but also still at station. Looking around, he realized that he'd never been in this particular room on the behemoth, though judging from the paint and other small details, it was obviously on the ship somewhere. He got up, realizing he wasn't wearing pants, and quickly grabbed his clothes from the chair next to the bed. As he struggled to loop his belt, he looked back at the bed, saw that it was thankfully vacant, but used. The bits were coming back to him. Sela leading him to a booth at the bar, the privacy screen, the drinks, the kissing. Then he noticed that the shower was running.
Shit,
he admitted. Think. The fab room was the only thing remotely in this part of the ship he'd need to visit. He didn't have his tablet, so he thought of some stuff he'd need. The plan was, slip out, go to the fab room, pretend he'd been working this whole time. Right? Right. It would have all worked out except Dee was on the other side of the hatch, about to press the chime. Jeremy sputtered. Dee didn't remark, but looked like he was in shock.
You never saw me, okay? I was never here, and this never happened.
McKay,
Dee said, stifling a laugh.
I'm serious.
I won't say a word, promise.
He choked. As Jeremy made his way through the kitchen, nobody said anything except Ari, who still hadn't said anything, but showed his disapproval through non-verbal means. He glared at Dee, who shrugged. Ari pulled out his medic tablet and told him,
You should probably put some antiseptic on that.
On what?
That?
Ari said, pointing at Jeremy's neck. His hand went to where Ari pointed and found it pretty tender. His fingertips brushed over a raised bump, then another, then another. They made an odd-shaped oval on his lower neck. There was literally no hiding it now, and Dee almost fell out of his chair, he was laughing so hard.
Jeremy stammered. I think I have some in my room, thanks.
Jeremy had been in Sela's quarters more than his own the last few days, and it was more or less common knowledge that they were an item. Nobody treated him differently, except for Ari, who was more concerned than he was displeased. It had been quite some time since he'd been this close to someone. He felt that his actions would mean something to someone. He'd make some kind of difference. The gnawing sensation at the back of his mind hadn't stopped, however. If these guns were to be used against his own people, he'd basically have committed sedition and was quite literally sleeping with the enemy.
No police on the scanners or networks,
she said casually.
Any chance they tipped someone off?
He asked.
If they did, it was probably to warn them we're hauling Lockheed equipment. I'd have never thought of that, by the way. They know we can hear their earpieces,
she said.
Figured it'd be better than picking from a multiple-choice quiz. Write in your own answer, you know?
There would only be one surface drop, Jeremy recalled. Sela had colonists on each station they'd visit to ensure delivery. So far, there had been no action on Meej, just the regular political rabble to free them from occupation amped up a bit. He figured that Perth would be the same. Drop off the goods. Next week or so, there'd be political outcry to withdraw Terran forces because they suddenly became self-sufficient.
Think we'll get caught?
He asked.
We're doing regular trade as well. It makes us look legitimate. We are legitimate. There's no actual law or policy forbidding what we're doing. Besides, it'll be too late then. We'll have the colonies supplied, and if the Terran government wants to keep its promise, it'll mean the end of the occupation.
Will it be enough, what we're providing?
He asked.
I hope so, Jeremy.
The gnawing sensation he felt didn't abide. The puzzle was complete, but he still felt like there was something missing. He'd finished all of the major repairs this week, so he was taking a day off. There was still plenty to do, but he was enjoying his time with Sela. He could only imagine his pa's disapproval for dating one of them damn Pathrans. On that note, he was expecting mail soon. They normally sent him something on Sunday. He'd get it about midday, so he excused himself and made his way back to his room. The mail he'd received was marked urgent, so he opened it. Ma's face filled the screen as she adjusted the camera, but shrank as she sat down again. It was their living room, much to Jeremy's surprise.
Hey, darlin'. Just wanting to let you know your pa and I got that next deposit. We finally went and got one of them computers you guys have been wanting for so long. Gotta say, it's pretty nice not having to go all the way down to the library just to say hi.
Jeremy was wondering what was urgent about this, but judging by the look on her face and Pa's absence, he was sure bad news was about to follow.
Your pa's in the hospital, son. Some police people came by the other day asking stuff about the ship you're on, and we didn't know anything, so we told 'em as such. They started in on Pa, and well, you know how pushy they are these days. Anyway, got into it with them. No fighting, just a lot of hollering, and he had a heart attack.
His throat tightened.
He's okay, though. Went to see him this morning, and the doctor said they got to him in time. He's going to get surgery tomorrow to put in a bypass. Listen, hun,
She said, getting close to the camera.
those cops wanted to know who you worked for, and we just said you work for yourself, and you do engineering for those alien folk. They seemed all right with it, but just wanted you to know what we told them.
She said, then sat back.
Let me know if you plan on being back for the holidays. Love you, sweetie.
Tears welled up in his eyes, and he felt his face go hot. Then Jeremy did something he'd never done since he started working out here. He deleted the message. Jeremy woke up with a start. Breathing heavily, he looked around the darkened room. The only illumination were the indicator lights from a few devices here and there. His breathing slowed, and he could hear Sella still asleep. Carefully, he got out of bed and got dressed. It had only been about 2.5 hours since he'd gone to sleep exhausted, and he would consider himself refreshed, but the gnawing in the back of his head was there to greet him. Despite that, he was no longer tired. He opened the door to her quarters and stepped into the hall, pausing for a moment to make sure he didn't wake her, then let the door close behind him. Since the AOG had been managing his sleep and recovery, Jeremy's shift wasn't really a thing anymore. He worked pretty much when he wanted, but given that there wasn't a whole lot to do, he typically just went to work when he wasn't eating, sleeping, or with Selah. He started walking and wondering. The thought in the back of his head that was quietly prodding him was like an itch you couldn't localize. It was irritating and becoming more and more of a distraction. As he passed the medical bay, he wondered if there was maybe a malfunction with the augment. But then again, the literature he'd read up on stated that it was equipped with clear and redundant indicators if something was wrong that went through each of his senses. He rounded a corner and nearly ran over Airy, who was going the opposite way.
Sorry there, man.
Jeremy said.
No problem. Hey, where are you heading?
Airy asked. Jeremy shrugged.
Dunno, just walking.
Is something bothering you?
Yes, Airy. I've got tens of thousands of credits worth of upgrades inside me and can't figure out why, he said.
Not really, just going for a walk.
Would you like some company?
Airy asked.
Sure, why not?
Jeremy slowed his pace a little so Airy could keep up without issue, but his mind soon began to wander again. His thoughts drifted to his father, who should be out of the hospital any day now. He made a point to try and get a live call going. It was funny, the telecom companies used the exact same quantum communication methods for live calls as they did mail, but charged a small fortune every minute you used to talk live. He'd done the math once, and it came out to be about 2 hours of work at his rate to pay for a 5-minute call. Pa would normally be pretty upset that he would spend so frivolously, but Jeremy figured he'd be okay since he was just getting out of the hospital. He wanted to talk to him badly. While he wasn't the easiest person to get along with, and his views were fairly narrow in perspective, he always had an answer. Furthermore, it was usually a good one. He was lost in a thought about how his father would react to find that he'd been shacking up with one of those Pa didn't like at all.
Jeremy!
Airy called, snapping him out of it.
What?
He said, turning around. Airy was about a dozen steps behind him at the bulkhead door. Jeremy realized where they were, and Airy plainly stated,
We're not supposed to be in here.
Jeremy waved him over, and Ari checked that nobody had seen them enter and shut the hatch behind him.
This is what it's all been about,
he said to Ari, opening one of the cargo doors. Ari gasped as the lights hit the multitude of shipping crates inside the container.
Are those medical supplies?
And guns, remember?
Ari popped the lid on one of the crates.
Wow, that's a lot of medicine.
Yeah,
Jeremy sighed.
and each container has a wall in it that's hiding about 20 or so rifles.
Do you think Sella's telling the truth about why she's arming the colonies?
Ari asked, hopping up to sit on one of the containers.
And these are all expired, you know. They wouldn't hurt anyone, but they wouldn't have the potency they used to.
That's what's bothering me,
He said, stepping out and looking at the other containers.
If the meds are barely any good, or if they work at all, what's it all about? The only thing I can think of is to pass a cursory inspection so she can get the guns in. Then again, there's not enough here to start a revolt.
Ari continued looking into the medicine bottles.
So why bother?
This container's going to Rax. Those two are going to Terrador. That one's going to... Shit, I don't remember. Thing is, there's not enough guns here to actually do anything against a garrison, right?
Oh,
Ari said quietly.
Oh?
Jeremy asked, looking back. Ari had gotten one of the caps off. Whatever was inside had his full attention.
What the hell is that?
Jeremy almost shouted. Inside the bottle were pea-sized red spheres apparently filled with liquid. Whatever they were, they had bad news written all over them.
I have no idea, but it sure as hell isn't amoxicillin.
Here, give me that bottle. Let's get out of here,
Jeremy said. As quickly and quietly as they could, they resecured the container and made their way out. Jeremy very nearly whistled the nothing to see here whistle as they strode away.
In here,
Ari said, pulling him toward the medical bay. Once inside, Ari enabled the privacy screen and locked the door.
Okay, what now?
How the hell should I know?
Jeremy half shouted, half whispered. A moment passed, and Ari crossed his arms at Jeremy.
I think you should confront Sela,
he said.
No way. Right now she doesn't know that we know it's not pills in those bottles. Hell, can Pa'arthans even take the same drugs as us?
Ari shrugged.
We can find out,
he said. They both leaned over the operating table, Ari standing on a stool, reading drug compatibilities. There were a lot more than Jeremy would have guessed, and the labels did match those that were indeed compatible between their species.
So, okay. Let's try to think from her perspective. She got kicked out of the house, but why? And now she's running a freighter around trading. Okay, sure. But in the midst of that, she's trying to supply a bunch of Terran-occupied Pa'arthan colonies with arms and tiny red balls, supposedly to meet the Federation's criteria to be self-sufficient. But we both know these aren't drugs.
Ari shrugged. They both sat in silence for several minutes, then Ari offered.
What if we're looking at this from the wrong perspective?
What do you mean?
Look at it from the colonists' perspective. How do you coordinate something of this scale with other colonies that are currently occupied? Surely the Terran military would have heard at least something by now, right?
Ari asked.
Yeah, you're right. Maybe they didn't ask for any of this? Maybe Sella's off on her own, dropping off these presents to all the colonies?
So it comes back to her. Why, though?
Jeremy straightened up.
Here,
he said, handing the bottle to Ari.
See if you can figure out what these things are.
Jeremy, I'm a medic, not a chemist, or whomever would deal with this.
Yeah, but you're not sleeping in the same room as Sela, and if we're going to find anything out, you're one of the least likely people they'd consider.
Jeremy turned to leave, but saw Dee on the other side of the door.
Ari?
Screen's still up. Maybe he needs something.
Quick, cut my arm or something and put some of that sealant on it.
Ari shook his head but got a scalpel and the spray ready. Jeremy offered his arm but didn't watch. Ari was quick with the blade, to the point that Jeremy hardly felt a thing. The sealant, however, hurt like hell.
Here,
Ari said, offering Jeremy actual medicine.
Painkiller immune booster cocktail. Take 2 a day.
Jeremy cradled his arm as he left.
Whoa, what happened to you?
Dee asked.
Know how the parts fabricator has that big warning label on it? Says not to reach inside while it's running?
Jeremy asked, trying his best to look embarrassed.
Ah,
Dee said knowingly.
Yeah, once those things are loaded and running, you can't just reach in there. You're lucky it was just a scratch.
Something clicked, and Jeremy suddenly wanted to turn around and tell Ari something important that he'd just thought of, but it was too late. Dee was already heading inside. Know what I didn't see in those containers? He wanted to say. Ammunition for all those guns. Jeremy found himself back in the fab room. He queued up several dozen radiator fins while he took the 20 he'd just printed and was making his way to the airlock when Sella called him.
Where are you right now?
She asked.
Good morning to you too,
He said.
on my way outside to repair one of the radiators.
Meet me in the cargo area, the other cargo area.
She said, ending the call.
Damn.
He arrived to find Sella and Dee looking at the container he and Ari had opened earlier.
Hey,
He said, keep it simple.
Someone's been in here.
She said flatly.
I was.
He said.
I went for a walk this morning, happened to end up here.
In the container?
She asked.
What? No. I went for a walk, wound up in here, realized it was a dead end, turned around and left.
See anyone else?
She asked.
Yeah, Ari saw me, asked me why I was in here. He told me it was off limits. News to me.
He said.
All right.
She said, her tone lightened, almost seductive.
See you later?
Jeremy swallowed hard. How was it that she had this kind of power over him?
Yeah, sure. I'll be outside most of the day, but we'll probably be done around dinner.
She turned her attention to Dee, asking him where he'd been and if he'd seen anyone. Jeremy took it as his cue to leave. Outside, he wouldn't get any calls unless it was urgent. He had too much to worry about affecting his repairs. The cool thing about space, he noticed, was that when you put something somewhere, it didn't go anywhere. Relatively, they were traveling pretty fast, but once the engines cut, you'd never notice. He let the new radiator fins hang out where he was working since they were too big for the tote. They were thin enough that he could bend the damaged ones and shove them in there, however. It was tedious work, removing the mangled metal, but the muscle upgrades helped him pry the more stubborn ones. Ari was right about the tactile upgrades in his fingers, too. He could definitely feel everything through the thick gloves. Before he knew it, he'd depleted his stock of fins. He'd only brought 20 with him because there wasn't enough room in the tote for more than that many damaged ones. He took a minute to take in the view. Their next stop bordered a nebula, and the view was pretty spectacular. He looked in the tote for his tablet to take a picture, but it wasn't there.
Ah,
He said to himself, realizing he'd left it in the fab room. He made a point to remember it. Space selfies were as old as Terran space travel itself, but his ma and pa would get a kick out of it. He made it back to the airlock without incident and programmed the tote to drop its load down at the recycler and pick up the next set of fins, along with his tablet. Jeremy plugged his suit into the recharger, and his air, fuel, and energy levels replenished.
Hey, Jeremy.
Ari's tiny voice called. He looked up to see Ari standing at the threshold.
hey man, what's up?
Can we talk?
He asked.
Yeah, just shut the inner door.
With both doors sealed, there'd be little chance that anyone could hear.
I did some research but didn't find much. The polymer shell was the only thing I found, and it's used to contain organic mass.
What kind of organic mass?
Anything, really. I've sent a few messages to people who might know. I'm a little worried about opening one to see what's inside. We're not equipped.
The speaker inside the airlock squelched slightly. Someone just started listening.
I'm telling you, Ari, the cut is fine,
Jeremy said.
Jeremy,
Dee's voice called over the speaker.
I'd advise you get your helmet back on.
What?
He looked out the viewport and saw Dee reach for the controls. The indicator over the outer door turned red, and the air reclaimers began drawing the air out. He looked at Ari, who was frozen in terror. Realizing there was no way he could finagle him into a suit in time, Jeremy got his helmet on and immediately mashed the abort button on the wall. Nothing happened. Ari shortly fell over, unable to breathe.
I'm sorry, Jeremy. We found out that he was the one in the container.
Dee said solemnly over the speaker. Jeremy began to panic, then remembered that he had a small amount of time. Not much, but he knew that you didn't instantly die when you went into vacuum. If he could introduce some kind of fault, any kind of fault to the inner door, the sequence would abort and the reclaimers would fill the airlock with air again. None of the controls were responsive. Bypassed had to be. He retrieved his beater flathead screwdriver from his tool belt and jammed it into the seal, but it wasn't enough. The viewport was the only structural weakness, he recalled, and he repeatedly hammered the driver into it, but all he did was scratch it. Aries' hand grabbed Jeremy's ankle, reaching for something, then went limp. Without hesitating, Jeremy clicked his heels and activated his mag boots. He walked halfway up the inner door and began smashing it with his heel. After 3 tries, he noticed a crack. Doubling his effort, he grabbed onto the railing and brought his heel down hard enough that he felt something in his foot explode in pain. He switched feet and grabbed Aries' arm and repeated the procedure. Air suddenly vented past them into space, and the outer door shut. The inner door opened, and Jeremy greeted Dee by the throat and slammed him against the bulkhead far too hard. There was a loud smack, and the light went out in Dakenburton-Tottenham's eyes. Jeremy picked Aries up and sprinted on whatever was broken in his boot down the corridor to the medbay. He got Aries hooked up to the vital monitor and saw that he was still alive, but was hanging on by a thread. He wasn't breathing. Jeremy flung cabinets open, looking for a mask, but decided that it was taking too long, so he cut the adapter off the hose and gently shoved it into Aries' throat and turned on the air tank.
What else?
He cried out. His mind went back to his training, epinephrine. Jeremy found syringe and, judging by Aries' small frame, drew a tiny amount into it. He fought the urge to pull more into it. Few species produced it naturally, and Marth's weren't one. He injected it just as the vital monitor alarmed. Aries' sternum cracked as Jeremy started compressions, so he lightened up a bit. He had to keep reminding himself to take it easy. But the urgency of the situation made Jeremy want to reach inside his friend and start pumping his heart by hand. After 10 minutes, he was shaking and the vital monitor gave up, silencing itself. Suddenly, the pain in his foot screamed at him, and Jeremy collapsed backward onto the wall. He let himself cry. The pain was nearly unbearable. He'd just lost what probably amounted to being his only friend on the ship, and the frustration of not knowing what the hell was actually going on overrode any capacity he possessed to keep it together any longer. The thing that surprised Jeremy was the lack of reaction by any of the crew. Their one and only medic just died, and their first mate was probably on his way out the door as well, if he wasn't gone already. Still in his EVA suit, he walked through the kitchen. Keir eyed him, but said nothing. His foot was killing him, maybe chipped some bone at the heel, but it didn't slow him. Jeremy's footfall almost sounded as angry as he was. Clank, 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 as he power-limped his way through the ship. While he was in the medical bay, he'd taken Aries' tablet, unlocked it with his fingerprint, and rewrote the fingerprint stored for security with Jeremy's own. He'd need to know if Aries' friends came through with what was in the red spheres, not to mention that his own access would probably be blocked soon. And since Aries was dead, it might give him a few extra minutes. He passed Sella's quarters and slowed, then stopped. For a brief moment, he considered letting this all go. Let this scenario play out, see how things went.
Fuck that,
he said aloud, continuing his journey. Jeremy half expected Sella to be at the only place he would go at this point, but she wasn't in the fabrication room. He sealed the doors, then accessed Aries' tablet. He sent a few messages, then loaded the crew locator. Surprisingly, it showed everyone except Aries and Dee right where they should be. There was no way Sella didn't know. Then Jeremy took a minute to think about it. Dee had no idea how long he'd be outside, and had no idea that Aries would seek Jeremy out. He might have just been passing by and saw a window of opportunity. They might not know. A pang of inspiration hit him. He paged the bridge.
Hey, it's Jeremy. Who's on duty right now?
Ressi is here, as is Sella. What do you need, Jeremy Subtle?
Ressi answered.
Nothing, actually.
he said, hiding his relief.
Just wanting to know who's there. It's been quiet for a while.
He said, hiding his relief. Selah replied in a somewhat sultry voice.
Hey, so Jeremy, how long do you think until you come back in for a break?
Normally, Jeremy would have felt his throat tighten, butterflies in his stomach, and inflammation in his groin area, but right now he felt remorse, not for him, but Selah. He was about to rain hell on her, and a very, very tiny part of him wanted her to be oblivious to the red spheres and Dee to be the sole person responsible. But he pushed that thought back under the rock from whence it came.
Soon?
He said.
Maybe an hour?
Canopy?
She asked.
Sounds good,
he said, ending the call. Checking their stock of raw materials, he canceled the print job for the radiator fins. Then he canceled it again, watched 2 more fins get started, and the last one abort about halfway through in a slush of aluminium pellets and a partially crafted fin. He shook his head. Now it was time to print some warheads. Jeremy signed into his profile on Aries' tablet. There was some things he needed to say. First and foremost, he sent a message to the Terran Border Patrol and Customs with the subject, murder. It detailed everything from his first arrival at Juntan to this very moment and laid out his plans for the immediate future. He also left contact information so that they would hopefully be able to reach him in case his access was blocked. Second, but more important than the first, he sent a message to his folks.
Ma, Pa, hope you guys are doing well,
he started.
I can't think of a way to ease into this, so I'll get right to it. I'm in a bit of trouble, and not the kind Pa can fix by showing up to the station down the road. Hello?
Hello, son.
His father said. He was clearly still in the hospital. The gown and plugs coming out of his arms were a dead giveaway.
Pa?
He asked, not sure if he was seeing things or not.
You know these calls are hella expensive?
Yeah, I know that, boy,
he said. Jeremy grimaced. He hadn't been called boy in a long, long time, back when his pa used to drink, but only when Jeremy had screwed up when he shouldn't have. That was the extent of it. Pa never hit him, nor his ma, but when you screwed up, he was sure to let you know, and he'd do it in that supremely condescending tone he probably didn't even realize he had.
Yes, sir?
Jeremy said.
Your ma's gone, son,
he said plainly.
What? I just heard from her day 4 yesterday?
She woke me up this morning, said she had an awful dream about you getting hurt, and, well, she was having a heart attack after your pa.
Pa?
Jeremy stammered, finding that words were particularly difficult at the moment.
Son, I know this isn't easy. Just tell me you're safe, please,
his pa said. Jeremy perked up. He needed his father's counsel right now, but given his condition, a tough fucking bastard can take it.
Pa, I'm not actually safe. I've got a bit of a problem out here,
he said.
It's bad. Like so bad you couldn't do what you do with the cops back home, and right now, you're the only person alive I can trust. He started, stifling his emotions. They killed my best friend out here, Pa. They killed Erie, he said. He watched his father for a moment and tapped his screen when he thought the image had freezed on him. But then Pa moved.
Son, your ma, my wife, the woman I've loved since I was your age, died dreaming about this,
his father said, stifling his own emotions.
That said, you want to know what I always told those cops?
Jeremy couldn't answer. The emotions were overwhelming.
I told them the truth, son. I went and told them cops you were just a boy doing boy things. They seemed to understand and they'd let you go.
No way!
Jeremy shouted, removed for the briefest of moment from his current situation.
Here I thought you had some funny pics of the chief's wife or something.
His father laughed at that, probably too hard given his condition.
No, son, I just told them coppers you were a good kid and you'd do us all right one of these days.
Jeremy sobered from laughter at that point.
Well, Pa, I'm doing the best I can. You know, I was about to send you guys a message, but I think we all know I'm going to do what I can.
His father nodded.
Call me son. They fixed me up pretty good, so I'll be good to take care of your brother and sister. But let me know how things go, for better or worse.
Jeremy locked eyes with his father's image.
What if it's worse?
I'm sure they'll figure out that you're a decent kid trying to do what's best.
He said.
Thanks, Pa.
He said, ending the call. Jeremy noted that 4 warheads were ready, and that the other 4 would be out shortly. Realizing he was still in his EVA, he called his tote, which promptly arrived. He programmed the 4 warheads he had, told the tote where to drop them, and locked the door when it left. Right now, he had nothing but time.
Hey,
He said, calling Sella.
Sec.
She said. There was some scuffling and a get out of the way before she came back with,
You done?
break time.
he said, smirking for all the wrong reasons.
Canopy?
Canopy, 10 minutes.
He said.
I'll be there.
She affirmed. Jeremy checked the queue. The restraints he ordered were due to come out just about now. There was a quiet ding Jeremy had programmed into the fabricator a while ago, and Pa Arthur intended restraints dropped out of the chute. Their intended purpose was to bind their wings to the opposing arms, preventing any upper torso movement without ripping something out of place. Sella ripped her left wing out of socket with her right arm.
We have a destiny to fulfill.
She screamed. Jeremy bear-hugged her.
No, we don't.
He said calmly.
You're going to rip your wings off if you keep this up. Stop, please.
No.
Sella cried, only then realizing the pain she'd just inflicted on herself.
Why, Sella? Just tell me why, please.
Jeremy asked.
You. That's why.
She said, seething.
Me? Oh, you mean my long-dead ancestors, right?
He'd been considering resetting her wing into its joint, but her sudden attitude change made him reconsider.
No, you.
She screamed.
Me? Oh, me. The guy you tried to kill to sell some guns with no bullets and that shit in the pill bottles. Right. The guy you totally used against his will to meet your own ends. Please, Sella.
He shouted, grabbing either side of her face gently in his hands.
Please tell me what this poor asshole farm boy from Iowa did to you.
She calmed a bit at that.
Fine, it's your people.
Okay.
Jeremy said calmly, adjusting the camera attached to the EVA helmet he was still wearing.
So my people pissed off your people. Why the red shit?
He asked.
You know,
She replied. It was in that tone, Jeremy realized. Things all of the sudden went from almost making sense back to what the hell.
No, do enlighten me,
He said.
ugh, do you seriously not remember?
Well, you did cut my oxygen, essentially forcing me to pancake myself against your airlock, killed my one and only buddy on this ship, and try to play it off like it's some kind of sex thing between you and me? Sorry if I'm a little confused.
You don't remember, do you?
She asked.
Remember what?
The first night you came up to the canopy?
Jeremy shook his head.
Yeah, we talked about drive-ins and bullshitted for a while.
That's the first time?
She asked. Jeremy's mind went fuzzy then. Was that the first time? He strained his mind to remember. No, that was it. This was a ploy to distract him from seeing her reach beneath the tree branch upon which she sat. He greeted her a lot like he did Daken Burton Tatim, just a little more gently. She was the only one with all the answers. Her hand came up with the plasma pistol, slowly, surrendering. He remembered that she had another hand, free now that her wing was dislocated. He pinned down that pistol-wielding hand as well, as...
Is it possible?
He grunted as he forced both weapons out of her hands.
That you have the ability to not lie to me?
She said the one thing that would ever make him hit a woman, the one and only time in his life. She said,
I love you.
and she lied.
Jeremy Suttle, this is Captain Jones with the Terran Police. Are you there?
A voice called on his tablet. He'd been sitting in the garden since he'd rendered Sella unconscious. The garden really did bring him peace, letting him relax for a moment despite the turmoil. That peace was over, he realized, as he picked up Aries' tablet. It was audio only, which was a little strange.
I'm here. The captain and first mate are subdued.
He said.
Good.
Jones said.
Are we clear to dock on the dorsal airlock?
Yeah, just...
He trailed off, His message was sent 37 minutes ago. Quantum relays transmitted it instantly. But he knew from the most recent map upload that the closest police cruiser would be days out, even on maximum burn. He was talking to pirates. Any other day, Jeremy would have freaked out. Any other day, he'd had stammered his response, would have made it clear that he knew what was going on. Any other day, and he'd had cost him and the entire crew their lives. It was a good day then, because he felt so emotionally numb at this point. It was easy to put on a happy face, to accept them at their word, and most importantly, today was not one of those days.
Actually, no. Jones, they've got warheads planted at most of the airlocks. I'm in the process of clearing them, but there's still 2 of those bastards still running around. Can I call you on this, Freck?
There was a pause, a lot longer than Jeremy hoped for, but he reminded himself that the longer the pause, the longer they were deliberating, and the more undecided they were about not only breaching, but not believing him, and he really, really needed these jackasses to believe him right now.
Yes, Subtle. Reach us on this Freck once you've cleared us a path. What's your ETA on that?
Jones asked.
An hour?
Jeremy said, consulting his tablet on the progress of the warheads.
2 tops.
Call us when you've got a path?
Absolutely. I just want these vermin off my ship.
He replied, testing the waters.
Understood. We'll wait for your signal.
Jones replied. Once the call ended, Jeremy made a ship-wide call.
All crew meet by bulkhead Sierra 05 S05 as soon as possible. That's all crew, pilot included,
he said. He made sure Sella wasn't going anywhere, then started off toward the other cargo deck to meet the remaining crew, but with one important pit stop, the med bay. The sight of Ares saddened Jeremy. He nearly broke down into tears again, but reminded himself why he was doing what he was doing. Carefully, he picked up Ares' body and made his way to the cargo deck. In the middle of the restricted bay, the entire crew stood shocked when Jeremy entered, cradling his friend in his arms.
This is what Sella and Dee did,
he said, gently laying his friend on the deck.
And that?
He said, pointing to the containers behind them.
That is why.
Even the other 2 Pa'arthans looked surprised and helped the other crew dismantle the container, revealing its contents.
Any idea what those are?
Jeremy asked the Pa'arthan, who had managed to be the first to look into the pill bottles. The shrug, Jeremy had learned in school, was a near-universal sign of, I don't know. It seemed legit, so he didn't want to try and interrogate them. That was a job for the police, which were 2 days out, all the while pirates were at their door.
So here's the deal. Sella and Dee sold us out. They're on some kind of suicide mission, and I can't figure out why, except they're both crazy. The police are on their way, probably less than 2 days now. In the meantime, Sella is captive up in her canopy, and I'm pretty sure Dakenbert Tatum is dead by airlock 13.
Jeremy blurted. There was chaos for a moment, but then he interrupted with,
Oh, and they murdered Aerie.
Jeremy shifted more weight to his non-broken foot.
Unless there's any volunteers, I'm assuming command until the cops get here. Oh, we have pirates at our door. Any takers? Resi, Ecoronamia, no takers?
He asked. Both looked at each other, then at Jeremy, shrugging.
Forgive me, guys, but 2 out of the 4 Pa'arthans I've ever met have fucked me royally recently. So I'm going to have to ask you to stay in your quarters until I say otherwise, okay?
Resi spoke.
We've no affiliation with Sela.
Yeah, neither did Dakenbert and Tatim. Please forgive my skepticism, but you'll need to stay in your rooms. Food and water will be brought to you,
Jeremy stated. Neither complained much and did as they were told.
As for the rest of us,
he said to the other 2,
we just have to make this ship as pirate-unfriendly as possible, and we have less than an hour to do it.
Still in his EVA suit, Jeremy watched as the fabricator finished the last warhead. It was all the fissile material they could spare. He pondered for a moment, then pushed the button on his EVA that would call his tote. He absolutely loved this tote. It had a pretty big storage area, enough for his tools and materials to keep him busy for hours. Its AI was pretty good too, he noted. If it encountered a hatch it couldn't normally fit through, or a corner that was a bit tight, it would scan it and turn itself to make it through. It even had an arm on it that would hand him things as he asked for them, being a silent but valuable helper. It was beat up, dented, and scratched. Unfortunately, he was running out of time and wouldn't be able to get another one put together by the time his self-imposed deadline ran out. Carefully, he set the warhead inside and retrieved his tools. Using his tablet, he programmed its final mission, patted the top of it, and said, "Best helper I've ever had. Been nice knowing you, pal." His thoughts immediately focused on Airy, and he fought back the tears. A soft chirp from his tablet told him that the task had been uploaded. Without hesitation, the tote then lifted off the ground and left for the airlock. His tablet chirped again, and Jeremy checked his messages. Terran Police Command had just replied to his query, confirming that they didn't have any ships near him and to ignore the other ship. He sent a short message.
Ignoring them isn't going to accomplish anything except getting blown up. Going to try to end this peacefully probably won't work.
He included his coordinates and trajectory, sent the message, and tucked the tablet into its pouch on his EVA.
"Hey, guys."
He calmed the rest of the crew.
"We all set?"
They all reported they had done what he'd told them.
"All right, I'm about to call them. Remember, just keep working unless something happens. If things start to go south, I want all of you to get to the escape capsule and go. I'll call if you can come back."
Ressi spoke.
What about us?
"I don't think you guys had anything to do with all this, but I just can't have you walking around. I'm going to try and dupe these guys into thinking you're still running around, so stay in your quarters and hide. If I make the call to evacuate, get the hell out. No reason not to."
Jeremy replied. There were no other questions.
"All right, I'm calling them."
Jeremy took a deep breath, then made the call.
"Hey, Jones, you there?"
We're here, Subtle. Did you find the other two?
Jones asked.
"No, they ditched their locators in their quarters. There's just not enough of us to search the whole ship effectively. Can you meet me at the ventral airlock?"
Jeremy asked, surprised his voice wasn't shaking. The shock was wearing off, unfortunately, and to call what he was feeling nervous was about as big of an understatement he could think of.
What's wrong with the dorsal?
Jones asked.
"The docking tube on that one has a finicky seal. Haven't had a chance to fix it yet,"
he replied.
Roger, we'll meet you at the ventral airlock. What's the other crew doing?
"They're working. Well, except the cook. They've locked themselves in the bridge until this is over,"
he replied.
You okay?
Jones asked.
"Shit. Yeah, just a little nervous with the other two running around. They already killed one of us."
Just get us in there, Jeremy. You're doing great.
Jeremy swore he heard someone laughing in the background.
"On my way to the airlock. Be there in 2 minutes,"
he said. They even looked the part, Jeremy noted. The 10 of them were all in police uniform and combat gear, with matching weapons and even name tags. He worried that maybe there was some kind of miscommunication with the Terran Police Command, but they had been positively clear that they had no ships near him.
"Jones?"
he called.
"Jones is on the ship."
One of them stated Lee according to his name tag.
"You Subtle?
"Yeah, let me show you what's going on."
Where's this cargo you were talking about? With the drugs and the red stuff?"
he asked insistently.
Yeah, this way. We opened all of the containers once we realized what's going on,"
he said.
"Would you,
he stammered.
Would a couple of you mind going first? I'm not a cop or anything."
A few of them took point, which made him a little more comfortable about not getting shot in the back.
"Left up here,"
he said.
"There's an access code to the door. It's huh?"
"What is it?"
Lee demanded. Jeremy let out a nervous laugh.
"It's a 88.
Lee shook his head.
Not big on security, I take it?
"Not really, I guess."
The 4 that were up front acted like police. Their weapons were raised the whole time, and they took the corner like Jeremy imagined soldiers would, peeking out for a brief moment before fully committing to the hallway. Lee shook his head again and entered the code. The door opened, and they piled in.
"Any idea what this stuff is?"
Jeremy asked. Lee picked up one of the pill bottles and uncapped it. He peered in, shining a flashlight.
"Looks like tremors,"
he said, tossing a bottle to one of the others, who nodded.
"Tremors?"
It's a kind of ammo. Weapons inside were probably repurposed to shoot it. Caustic and toxic as hell. Would knock you out the second you breathed it in and would kill you within a minute. If you were wearing a mask, it'd eat through it pretty quick. Hits your skin it.
Got it.
Jeremy interrupted.
Sounds like some nasty shit.
Very. And also very illegal pretty much everywhere. You find out where they got it from?
Lee asked.
No, but the captain might know. She's in the uppermost deck, called the canopy.
Yeah, we'll be taking her with us.
Lee stated. He pressed a button on his wrist.
Hey, Jones.
Go ahead.
Jones replied. Jeremy was actually glad he had the brain aug right then.
Found the stash, tremor rounds and guns to shoot them. 4 containers worth.
Holy shit, that's a good haul. Real good.
Lee turned and quietly asked,
What do you think it's worth?
Fuck, man, like 20 mil? 30. Add the ship and whatever else they got. And we're looking at like 40 or 50.
Might have the supplier too,
he said.
Captain might know, Jeremy mentioned.
Shame, really. Kid just made us fucking rich.
Jones sighed.
All right, you know the drill.
Roger.
Lee said, drawing his sidearm, turning and leveling at Jeremy's face.
Sorry, kid. Don't want to hurt you. So we're going to go up to the bridge and get everyone down here. All goes well, we'll drop you all in a pod, shoot you at racks, let those guys pick you up.
I'm sorry, too.
Jeremy said, raising his hand, pressing his thumb to his little finger. Lee shrugged.
That's, cute?
If you want to call a dead man switch cute, sure.
Jeremy said. All of them took several steps back. There was a lot of yelling, but Jeremy didn't mind.
Shut the fuck up, all of you!
Lee shouted.
Listen, Subtle. Don't know what you're packing in that EVA suit of yours, but you won't get all of us.
Just me in this suit,
Jeremy replied. A smile crept onto his face.
Switch goes to warheads in those containers.
Bullshit,
Lee yelled. Jeremy pointed to one of the crates.
You can open that one. I didn't rig it with any anti-tamper devices. Figured you might not believe me.
Lee opened the lid and found an armed 10-megaton warhead staring back at him. With a hand that shook like he came down with a sudden case of Parkinson's disease, he activated his comm.
Cap, we got a problem. Kid rigged a bunch of warheads to a dead man's switch.
Fuck. All right, I'll jam it. Give me a minute.
Jones replied.
Mind if I talk to him?
Jeremy asked politely. Lee looked at Jeremy like he was crazy. Hell, he probably was.
Fuck if I care who you call.
Hey, Jones?
Jeremy called.
Kid, don't know what you're playing at, but...
Need you to not jam this. It's not that kind of dead man switch,
he said calmly.
Why would I want to do that?
He asked.
Because the switch armed the warheads when I pressed it, but it's also transmitting a signal to keep them from detonating. You'd be jamming the don't blow up signal.
Fuck, stop!
He yelled at someone. An eternity passed.
All right, Subtle, what's your play here?
Right now,
he said, pushing another button on his comm. His voice boomed throughout the ship.
You're going to let the rest of my crew get onto their escape capsule and leave.
Fine,
he said.
Let the other crew go.
Jones said over Lee's comm.
Understood,
Lee replied.
Then what?
Jones asked Jeremy. He pressed the button again, taking him off the ship-wide PA.
Then we're going to wait for them to call me and tell me they're a safe distance away. In the meantime, we're all going to go to the kitchen, and I'm having a drink.
Once in the kitchen, Jeremy pointed to the liquor cabinet.
Lee, would you mind? Don't really want to risk blowing us up for some bourbon.
Lee shook his head and half threw, half dropped his rifle onto the counter and grabbed a glass.
Anyone else?
Jeremy asked.
Help yourselves.
Jeremy downed half the glass. Lee and one of the others joined him. After several minutes of uncomfortable silence, Jeremy asked,
So, aside from today, how's the pirate business?
Why?
Lee scoffed.
You looking for a job?
Now that he'd mentioned it, Jeremy tried to imagine working on a pirate ship.
Dunno, how's the pay?
You're fucking kidding me, right?
Lee asked, slamming the rest of his drink. He slid the glass to one of his subordinates, who went to refill it.
Never considered it, really. Think it'd better than nearly getting killed by your own captain so she can shove some implants in you?
There were a few nervous chuckles. Lee was about to say something when Jeremy's tablet chirped. It was a message from home, not the message he was hoping for, but certainly not unwanted since it might be the last one he got to see.
Hold that thought,
he said. He was about to excuse himself, but decided what the hell. He hit play. It was his younger brother, Seth. He was 17, so when Jeremy saw the tears streaming down his face, he knew it was pretty serious.
Jeremy,
His brother started, wiping his face.
I don't know how to tell you, so I'm just going to tell you. They're gone, bro.
Jeremy's heart felt like it had stopped for a minute. Seth continued.
Cops came by the hospital, asking about you again. Pa got pissed, and they got into it good this time. Pa lost it, and well, they shot him.
Jeremy's mouth hung open as he watched his brother bawl for another minute.
Wasn't even armed,
he screamed. After calming himself a little, he continued.
But you know they don't really care about all that. Best case, they get a paid suspension. Anyway, so we're gonna stay with Uncle Rob till I'm 18, then me and Sis are gonna get a place. This shit's all your fault, bro. Don't fucking call us. Don't come and try to make it right, 'cause you can't. Don't know what shit you're into, but you killed them.
The message ended there. Across from him, Lee's eyes had grown wide. Jeremy's shut tight, fighting back tears. There was no time to grieve right now. He had to think about his options. He'd planned on just two, and they all began to diverge right at the juncture he currently found himself, just without the message he'd just gotten. The plan was to let his crew get safe, tell the pirates to fuck off. At that point, they'd likely just shoot the ship from a safe distance. At which point, Jeremy would detonate the warhead inside the tote that had certainly attached itself to their ship by now. If they didn't, his tote was to detach after 3 days and find a nice, safe place to blow up. Regardless, he had planned to let the actual police do their thing. Now they could go fuck themselves. Jeremy opened his eyes to a full glass being plopped in front of him. He grimaced as he downed the whole thing.
You trust your captain, Lee?
Jeremy asked. Lee nodded.
Why?
He wouldn't say cut your O2 so he could shove some implants in you, would he?
Fuck no. Jones has always done all right by us.
Jeremy looked around at several nods.
You guys wouldn't be in need of an engineer, would you?
Lee had spent the last few minutes talking to Jones. From what Jeremy could hear, the conversation was going in his favor. Then came the topic of Sella and her cargo.
Sell it back to her house,
Jones said.
She's disowned,
Jeremy interrupted. Lee looked at him funny.
You heard all that?
Yeah. If it's even true, I just don't know with her. If she is disowned and she were on fire, her family wouldn't piss on her to put her out,
he said. There was a long pause.
So we can blow it up or just leave it?
The fuck if I'm going to let her leave with it,
Jeremy said.
Kid,
Lee said.
if you're serious about signing on, you need to realize something. You don't give orders. You get a say, but you don't tell anyone, much less the cap, what to do.
Jeremy shook his head.
Sorry, after what she's done, I just can't see letting her win.
There was another long pause, then his comm chirped.
Jeremy, we're away. Let us know when you can.
Keir said, ending the call promptly.
You hear that?
Lee asked.
No, sorry, crew's safe distance now,
Jeremy said.
Cap's going to talk to you on the ship. Our ship. You got to disarm that switch, though.
Lee said. There was a moment of hesitation. Jeremy had developed some trust issues recently, but he disabled it and made a show of separating his thumb from his little finger. He pulled the glove off and removed the magnetic switch, then taking out the battery to prevent any accidents.
I'll get the one off your ship, too,
he said, pulling up his tablet.
What?
Lee yelled.
Yeah, had one in a tote. Attached itself right when you boarded,
he said, entering the commands into his tablet. The tote detached and returned to the behemoth. Done. Lee shook his head.
Let's go.
They were in the process of discussing Sayla's fate. Jones was somewhat on the fence, The cargo would be difficult to sell without drawing a ton of unwanted attention from some very dangerous people. On the other hand, it was a lot of money. They both made their case. Jeremy supported Jones's former argument that it was too risky and added that Sella needed to pay. Lee thought it was worth the risk. Jeremy found the pirates to be very civil about it.
All right, vote time.
Jones said.
All in favor of blowing it up?
5 out of the 12 raised their hands, Jeremy included. Shit, Jeremy thought. Selling it? Only 5 raised their hand. Jones looked at Jeremy. He hadn't voted yet, and Jeremy was lost as to how things worked. Just then his tablet chirped at him.
Oh, fuck me sideways.
What?
Sella somehow got loose. She's on the bridge. If she engages the engines, the warheads blow.
Christoph, get us the fuck out of here.
Jones screamed. They accelerated hard. There wouldn't be a shock wave since there wasn't any air for the warheads to push, but they needed to get far enough away that shrapnel wouldn't shred them. Jeremy's tablet chirped again, and Jeremy strained to get it out of his pocket since they were strapped in and burning hard. Again, he found himself glad to have the implants.
Captain Jones, warheads just went off,
he yelled.
Christoph, how are we?
5 minutes to impact now, but if we keep burning, it'll take 15 to reach us. Should be dispersed enough not to tear us up too bad.
Jones shouted loud enough for Jeremy to hear.
Guess that settles that.
Jeremy felt an unexpected smile creep onto his face as he thought of Sella. He had never heard truer words.